right, well, welcome everyone to another episode of Open Chat, the podcast that we have here at Penpot, where we love to see intersection between code, design, and open source. And today I have two guests, not one. I have Nimisha and I have Eriol. Thank you very much for being here. So this is very exciting because we're going to discuss a foundational research that they gifted us recently. So let me first introduce, we have Nimisha here. Nimisha, she's user experience designer at Nextcloud, close friends at Nextcloud. Hi, Nimisha. And Eriol, they are senior designer and open source product manager at Superbloom and PhD researcher at Newcastle University. So it's an honor to have Eriol with such an amazing title too. So I think we could start by you telling us a bit about the research, how it came to be, and then I would love to ask you some questions on the paper itself, and some impressions. So you decide who goes first.
Nimisha, do you want me to give okay? It's always really funny when I talk about the history of how this came to be because Nimisha is like central to it. And I remember when I spoke to Nimisha about this research happening and why it happened. Again, it was kind of like it sort of always feels like, hey Nimisha, you made all of this happen. And Nimisha was like, wow, okay, really? Anyway, so there was the reason that this research was able to exist is because there was an open source design community call a fair few years ago now, probably like 3 or 4 years ago, where Nimisha came into the community call and asked a pretty standard question that maybe a lot of designers in open source have often asked, which is, how do other designers do their contributions to open source, and are they writing down their experiences and sharing those experiences anywhere? And I remember hearing this question and thinking, well, we don't really write things down very often. If we are writing things down, it's difficult to find. And so a few years later, I believe I was talking to Amanda Kasari over at Google's open source program office, and she also is part of the Vermont University, the Vermont Complex Systems, which gives out the Ocean Grant, which funded this research, and essentially asked whether the Ocean Grant, which is focused on trying to make sure that research happens in open source in the areas that don't get commonly researched. So a lot of things that get commonly researched are the kind of code aspects of open source, like how popular, how many pull requests, how many commits, those are the common things that get academic research. And Ocean funds the things that don't commonly get researched. And she was really excited to have a proposal for a diary study of designers contributing to open source.
Actually, the name,
so that's how this
the name of the paper is Designers in Open Source Software, Summary of Diary Studies of Designers Contributing to Open Source Software. So that's the paper's title.
The findings document, or the report, if we want to call it, it's actually not, the research hasn't been gone through like an IRB process. So it's not like, it was funded by the university to happen as like an open data set, but it isn't necessarily, let's say, gone through the rigorous processes that often a lot of academic papers have to go through.
Yeah. And then we have this very catchy title, which is The Secret Life of Open Source Designers, which I love. Very good, very good. So it's great that we have those grants in order so that this kind of research can happen. I have to say, I read it, I think in one go when I first knew about this. I have all this here, with annotations and all that. And even if you would say, Eriol, that it didn't go through all the rigorous academic paper peer review, it's clear that there is a solid methodology here. Like, it's a very well structured, very articulate, thoughtful process. It actually encourage you to just keep reading to get those insights, till you get to the end and you say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And I think perhaps that's a great segue for my first question, because the same way someone like me would read this and learn some stuff, there are some things that were in a way there already. Like you had this intuition that even without research, you would think is going on, and then you would confirm this through the research, not with a bias, but actually just through the proper methodology. So, is there a perhaps what is the best example of a preconceived idea that you have prior to starting the research, this work, and then it was very beautifully confirmed afterwards? Something that was very evident, but was you needed to go through it to properly show it. Like, yeah, this is real. Any example of a preconceived idea that you had that was confirmed, Nimisha?
Well, I mean, it was a lot actually. But I think maybe one thing that made me go like, oh, it's not just me, because
Yeah,
I also work as an open source designer, was the fact that many participants talked about how things were kind of slow.
yeah,
So yeah, people talked about the pace at which their work was progressing, and specifically referring to feedback and collaboration with the other people on the project as well. So I mean, I think even as designer stakeholder collaboration is something that's a little bit tricky, and that coupled with the often like volunteer led nature of open source projects, so people are only working on it on their free time,
yeah,
as well as being like having to learn different software, and limitations of open source libraries, like technical limitations, for example. I think it all just made sense when almost all the participants were like, sometimes it took a couple of weeks for people to get back, and I was like, yeah, same, honestly. So I think that was something that was quite
Mm.
validating for me. What about you, Errol?
And to what you were saying, we had people that were contributing to what you could describe as like small team projects through to like
hmm,
projects that are like quite large and significant global distributed projects. So we had like quite a broad selection of different open source projects that were being contributed to by these designers, but that slowness was common throughout different sizes of projects, which is interesting to note that it isn't about like often the responses to the slowness of feedback or like how the pacing of open
yeah,
source happens. Usually responses are like resources, more well contributors, and sometimes it's just like that's how open source functions. It's kind of almost like a characteristic of open source is that it is,
yeah,
maybe slowness isn't the term that is most like accurate, but maybe intentional is like another way of like describing intentionally like inclusive in a way, but almost frustratingly inclusive
yeah,
in a way as well. um, there were, like Nimisha was saying, there's so many different things that were like suspicions that
mm,
were confirmed by the research. I think that one of the things that has commonly is a common response when you introduce yourself as a designer that contributes to open source or is involved in open source is often and you're talking to somebody that isn't primarily doing design in open source, so some other open source function, is the common response is, oh, so UI, visual design, those kinds of things.
yeah,
And so I had the preconceived idea that I knew that open source design contributions were not just all GUI and like UI visual design. There are lots of other different kinds of contributions, which was, yes, confirmed by many of the participants that the things that they were contributing cannot be contained within a typical kind of
yeah,
design software, as it were. They are documents of research, they are insights into how users use things, and then also visual design, other kind of aspects of design which you can sort of see, as it were. They have art is so difficult to you can see them as like objects of design,
yeah.
if you can kind of
That's a good way to
describe
put
it
it.
that
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Interesting. Perhaps we can discuss, at a later date, that slowness, whether it's specifically for the design contribution, if there is any correlation with the pace at which that specific open source project operates, because I guess there could be this disconnect between an open source project that is actually going pretty fast in their code development process, and yet experiences or exposes a different, a slower pace when it comes to the design contributions. Like it's kind of unfair, because in reality the project looks like it's going fast, but then we have this. Well, we can discuss that perhaps. That would be an interesting way to correlate or not correlate slowness. Wonderful. Well, as the audience knows, this is an open chat, and guests also get to ask questions, kind of a ask me anything for Penpot. So if you have right now you have a question that you would like to ask, me as a spokesperson could answer that. Anything curious about Penpot, the process, the team, the technology, whatever, the mission, open. If not, I have another question. We can go. So what do you want? Do you want to ask a question, or should I go with my second one?
I mean, I have lots of questions. I don't know how much time we have, so
Okay, Nimisha, shoot.
yeah, cool. So, I mean, one thing that we actually found in this study also was this. There was kind of a blurry line between users and contributors for a particular project, and I think that was really interesting because I faced that conundrum as well, because we work in an open source project where we have users, and as designers we're really interested in the user's experience of the product itself, but often we have access to the contributors more directly, but they maybe are not representative of all the users of the product itself. So I'm really interested in how Penpot, approaches this. So how do you conduct user research, for example? And I think it's just an interesting sort of question to put forward that's specific to open source. So any insights there?
Yes, I can share some ideas that we keep very close to us. Like, for instance, we don't have we need specific user personas that are distinct between them. So we have the designer persona, then we have the developer persona, and then we also have a relevant stakeholder persona. Okay, so when you and well, we have a long tail of personas, but really, we even if there are archetypes that perhaps don't really represent the reality, how personas, it allows us to simplify some of the work in terms of research. So that means that we could have users, like a designer as a user, or a developer as a user, or a product manager as a user, and then what is their other life as a contributor? They will contribute differently. A designer can contribute with design artifacts to for Penpot. Like, I think this is better than this micro interaction is not ideal, but they can also contribute with a library or a template. Um, so there is a more broader approach to, as a user, what you can do. And again, developers can use Penpot because it's really it's for design and code collaboration for both designers and developers. So we make sure that they are enjoying a tool that they can contribute to. So that is, but it's different perhaps from someone with a design background. But I think the most important, apart from the complexity of the user, the concept of a user, is the fact that we have decided that we need to do as much research as possible as early as possible. So we want to we don't really benefit from surprising people that much. It's not a benefit for us to say, hey, Penpot 1.15, surprise, surprise, we have this build for you. We hope you like it. Not at all. The way we do this, we engage with the community as early as possible, sharing our draft ideas, our research, involving them in surveys and in polls, informal conversations at our community space, and we get during events. So we make sure we have a proper process. But I think the most important thing here is that we engage with that with the community as early as possible. There's no such thing as too early for us. There's no such thing. And then what happens is by the time let's say some feature is primed, it's already ready to release, we even stop and conduct a final work of research in terms of survey, early access, questionnaire. What do you and we publish all that, so there is more conversation happening on the community. A very good example of this was Penpot 2.0 CSS grid layout, which was, I think, 50-50 conceived by the core team, and then also influenced and impacted by research done by us with the community, but also by the community itself. So, and I don't think we could have done that if we had waited till the very end to suddenly unbox a feature. So I think, in a nutshell, as early as possible, understanding that we have different stakeholders, not just one type of user. And then even when you are close and very sure about something, you still pause and allow for a deeper conversation. And that has allowed us, that kind of research has allowed us to be bolder in some aspects, because there is a pressure, a tension from the community that you only get and feel when you are actively having this conversation. Otherwise, you are just working with your own ideas. So yeah, I guess many other platforms, open source, will deal differently with research and how that impacts the roadmap. But this is a hint into our own process.
Such a power of open source, though, right? As well, Pablo. Like in proprietary, that openness. I've well, not having worked in a proprietary software product, like on the scale of like a design tool or a development tool, but like it does still feel like it's a little, well, it's closed, it's proprietary. Yeah. You don't sort of have that discussion, that two-way, what do you think of this? Or there's like a hierarchical, like, you are blessed to beta test
yes.
our new features, right? It sort of feels like it perpetuates some of that stuff in the design industry, which is about exclusivity and about like, the special like stuff of how you build design, which is largely becoming more and more absent from open source design as like a practice. I think I've observed over the years, but yes, it's cool to hear
totally
Penpot's
agree.
processes.
It's this idea of a wall garden, this idea, this blessed. I love that. I think open source takes a different approach, and we definitely follow that path, which is we don't care so much as that you feel privileged to know something cool, but to really feel that you own this, that is also yours, and you had an impact. So we are going to it is a tricky balance, because you still want to showcase something that is surprising and innovative. And if you are completely transparent, then a bit of that surprise moment is gone. But in turn, you innovate faster, and you have something co-created. It's much more resilient, actually. You in a way you are safer, because you know that what you are releasing has the support from the communities. Like it's so I don't know. It's but yeah, I'm more into less surprises and more support and co-ownership. And yeah, I don't want to make people feel privileged because they had early access to something. I want people to feel privileged, perhaps because they belong to a community that respects their ideas, and they own a bit of the product for real. Like, yeah, that's the community with a capital C in my book. But yeah, wonderful. Okay, I have a second question. So this actually, in a way, related to this two user persona comment that I shared. There is, I'm perfectly aware that there is a tricky relationship between developers and designers. That's a tricky one. And you talk about in the paper, you talk about this power differential between designers and developers. I think we would all say in general in the world, but particularly in open source, since you are covering that realm. And would you say it's overall worse or better in open source than out there in general in the software industry, that power differential between developers and designers? And to be clear, when I say differential and when you say differential, you are referring that developers own and hold so much more power. Okay.
Do you want me to go for it, Nimisha, or do you want to start
go
with
ahead,
any?
go ahead.
Oh, such a big question, big topic. I think so. In the study, it was present. It was very clearly present. You can see a differential, whether or not both parties, and when I say both parties, I refer to developers broadly, or like the people that maybe are the configurers of the open source, which aren't usually always like a certain like level of like developer
Yeah.
like proficiency. Sometimes they actually are people that have created an open source tool that actually has fairly simple sort of like code functions in it, but they are like the expert in the thing that
Yeah.
it does. For example, like scientific research open source software is like but the power differential between the person that kind of owns, has started, or develops most of the code or maintains, and then the designer, which often very rarely hold like maintainer status.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think any of the designers in the study refer to themselves as like maintainers, always individual contributors in some way. And the power differential, I feel, wasn't spoken about explicitly, but definitely was present in how designers the value of the designer's contributions were regarded, and just kind of like access. In a very simple way, the power can be kind of reduced to the access that developers or maintainers had versus designers have. So one of the interesting quotes around designer developer collaboration was, "I hate GitLab. Sorry, GitLab. It's confusing, and the team did not put me as a developer yet." And so that might mean that they didn't have certain like powers to create pull requests or open issues if you're not put as a certain status within a certain setting. And so just kind of fundamentally, there wasn't like maybe that spark in the maintainer's brain to be like, oh, a designer, I'll still add them as a person that can create pull requests and do these things, because maybe there was the assumption that that would not happen because of the nature of the contributions. And it's kind of the power differential, I feel like, is very much informed by how much each other, developer and designer, know about each other's function and what I think the designers are often disempowered when they don't know a lot about open source and they don't know what to ask for and how to present, like how to involve them developers in the design process. Like these are all things that, you know, again, like are largely unwritten, like hard to discover, and they're often like things that solo designers individually on projects are often quite alone, so they have to figure out themselves and kind of figure out the processes for. But yeah, a lot of there was one. The only other thing that I would say on this is that there was one notable element in the study that talked a lot about the cliques that can evolve in, specifically in this case, a much larger open source project, a very significant larger open source project. And I think the interesting thing there was we got a lot of the information from the designer, which was about feeling excluded, feeling unrespected in their contributions, not knowing who to speak to or how to sort of get involved with these cliques. But I think that speaks to like a just a difficulty in how to communicate like what I'm doing, and also something that Marianne Duffy or
Lauren Duffy,
Marianne
yeah,
from
yes,
Red
yes,
Hat. Yeah, I think she wrote about this in a paper about how sometimes you just can't actually find the team that are responsible for a particular part of the open
yeah,
source. And so, like, you know, these big distributions often have many different teams working on like lots of different aspects. And you might be like, I've got a design. And then the developer would say things like, oh, you need to go speak
yeah,
to that team over there that deals with that specific thing. And that's not something that a designer would like reasonably know about. And so it can sort of reinforce the aspect of like power differentials
yeah,
when it's like known knowledge from
yeah.
a developer point of view, but unknown knowledge from a design point of view.
Got it. All right. Now is the time if you want to ask another uncomfortable question to the Penpot team. Do you have anything in mind?
I think I have a question. I'm still not quite sure on the phrasing
Okay.
of it. So I think first it's going to be like a little love bomb, which is I love that a lot of what Penpot is trying to do is demystify the process of
Mhm.
designing for
Yeah,
developers. Like there is an aspect of like, this is what design is, and you can learn the processes of design through like the involvement of open source. And I think that's incredibly powerful and will help with that power differential between like design and
agreed.
development. I think it possibly is making designers nervous that their jobs
Okay.
their jobs may
Yeah,
be sort of taken over, but who knows? But I think what it's reinforcing is that collaboration between, or that kind of typical like handoff. It used to be called like the handoff period between design and development. Like developers get a series of prototype files, and I'm really interested to hear about an aspect which came up in the report a lot, which I've mentioned, which is about a lot of designers that are contributing to open source, although there are like exceptions, are often solo
yeah,
designers. And something that came up in the report a lot was I'm quite lonely, like, or different ways of saying I'm lonely. I'm a solo designer contributing design to this one project. I really believe in this
yeah.
project. I'm trying to do as much as I can to involve the developers in the design process, but that's hard. But also, like, how do I better involve designers in collaboration processes within open source projects? So I'd love to know, like, what, because I feel like the components element of like Penpot and like design system elements are good ways for designers to collaborate. But I'd love to hear
Mhm.
any thoughts and ideas on how to get more than one designer contributing to
Well,
open source.
I mean, that loneliness, that's interesting idea. Well, first of all, let's say that there is the ratio out there between designers and developers is not 1 to 1. Okay. Best case scenario is 1 to 10. At Penpot, we have 1 to 2, which is quite unique. But that also explains how we approach our own pro roadmap, and different priorities. But I think this is something very dear to us: how to make sure that designers, even in fewer numbers, A, don't feel lonely, B, feel understood and respected, and they now enjoy like kind of a next level of collaboration. The only way, or one of the only way we think we can achieve that is by building Penpods so that it is at its core a design prototyping tool, but then it has taken ideas and abstractions and vocabulary from the code world, so that is welcoming developers and making them feel like this is also their productivity tool. And before you mentioned Maureen Duffy from Red Hat, she was saying that thanks to Penpot, she now felt that more and more developers were spending time on Penpot. So that loneliness, I mean, she's not alone. They have a nice design team at Red Hat, but she was surprised and very, joyfully surprised that somehow Penpot attracted developers more naturally than other design tools. And I don't think that is just pure luck or just a coincidence. I don't even think it's due to the fact that Penpot is open source, not just alone. I think it's the fact that as a developer, when you go to Penpot and look at the prototype or design, the user experience and how we name things and what we decide is kind of the core elements of your productivity work resonate with developers. That is also behind the reason to bring CSS is a declarative design language kind of natively into Penpot so that the designer can just enjoy declarative design, their own rules using CSS, and the relationship between the design and code is one-to-one. And that is going to be super exciting for both parties because they are sharing a language. So we really hope that more developers will enjoy the design process through a tool that understands that it has to speak to a broader audience, not treat designers and developers as siloed groups. So yeah, it's one of our, in a way, it's one of our key differentiation aspects, but also is one of our biggest challenges. How to make sure that we bring developers to the design process and we solve the power differential at the same time. And so, yeah, looking forward to it.
Me too.
All right. Thank you for that question, Eriol. You're very to the core of how we conceive a design tool these days. I mean, this is not 2010, right? It's a different decade, so things have to change. And perhaps related to this idea of tools and the role that some tools can play. What do you think tools could? What is the role you think tools could play in how design contributions are managed or treated? I mean, this is a paper about design contributions to open source, and we sometimes discuss processes, but tools are there inevitably. I don't think tool for the sake of a tool. We know that is there's no point. But how do you think tools could make designers also first-class citizens in open source as a contributor? Does it even make any sense to say a design pull request at this point? What do you think? What do you think tools could do to bring those designers and those design contributions to open source, like really natively? Nimisha, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question because tools obviously play a very important part in,
Mm,
how comfortable someone feels in contributing. Like Errol said, like I think one participant said that they just don't understand just the tool that they need to use to be able to help out this open source project. So totally agree that tools definitely do play a part, and they also go into the power differential in between the different groups that are part of this project. And I think it's a very interesting question to think of a design pull request because also, like Errol said, the design contributions are really not just visual design. They're
yeah.
they're really messy, they're complicated. I mean, I haven't the way the best tool, I guess, that I've found is just typing things down in a little checklist and
Yeah.
hoping for the best, I guess. So I think the idea of a design pull request would be like, I don't know, ever evolving or really personal as well to each designer's design process, whether it's super structured, like with all the sticky notes, whiteboard. And for me, I just draw on a notebook and, like things materialize on their own. So I think it's a very interesting question. If there was a tool that somehow managed to sort of funnel this very nebulous and ambiguous process into something that can be translated easily between different groups, I think it would be like it would be very interesting. I don't know. I don't know how that would look like. It would take a lot more time to think of something like that. But I think it would be very interesting for something like that to exist.
Yeah, one of the things that the designers said in the study that they hated spending so much time on was like the task of like collecting all their things and making sure it was presented in a way
Yeah.
that not necessarily was like palatable to the developers and maintainers, but that was like understandable. And there was like an understanding that that was necessary because isn't the tooling like Nimisha speaks to that gathers the varied kinds of ways that design is done into like the place where the open source is, because the place where the open source is not where the design happens. Or only in certain circumstances, like the design goes from one location to the open source and it's kind of got a disconnect. So anything that helps designers reduce that admin effort, essentially what Nimisha is saying, is going to help. The other things that I think are really interesting, because the study has this huge section which is about success. Like, essentially, we wanted to try and like understand, how do designers define successful open source contributions that they make? Like, what are the ways in which they feel really good about participating in open source? And there are two that I speak about or have spoken about at conferences. One is a specific kind of feedback. So designers love feedback. They love fast feedback. As Nimisha was saying earlier, like the process is harmful to designers because of like the speed. So anything that the tools can do to speed up feedback processes would be great. But also designers felt most successful when they had feedback that was actionable and specific. So when they got feedback that was like, I like the design, specific-ish, but not actionable. Like, what is the next thing that I need to do? Or what are there things that I need to change? Or does this address the issues, like description of what the issue or the need is? So designers need as fast as you can do feedback, like as fast within the parameters of like how you agree feedback, it to be actionable and specific to what they're doing. And the other thing was knowing what priorities are. And this kind of maybe goes a little bit to different kind of tooling, which is a little bit more about like, how do open source projects better signal to the community what is a priority to be worked on? I see you nodding vigorously, Nimisha. Is there anything you want to speak to about the priority side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think for I don't know if it's specifically a part of the study, but what I've seen as part of the open source design community over the years is new people who join are just really confused about what to do. So there is a jobs board on the open source design forum, and there someone posts a job saying, "Hey, we need some design help on this," and someone replies. A designer very enthusiastically replies saying, "Hey, I'm really interested. Please tell me what to do." And then I don't know if anything happens after that. So this, I think it would be like, I mean, I totally agree with Errol that putting forward priorities and here are some things that you can work on and actionable priorities would be super, super helpful to anyone who's new, especially, and anyone who doesn't know about, like the trials and tribulations of working in open source.
Because it goes back to the speed, like the slowness thing as well. Because if you're waiting for feedback on one issue, knowing another issue that you can work on as like designers is gonna be really important. And I think there were like a number of different ways that designers hacked ways in the study to try and understand what the priority was, and they used design methods actually to like design research methods to extract priorities from like the stakeholders, which was cool to see. But I think to what Nimisha's talking about, is there was also a section of the study which was about what do designers look for when they're looking for a project to contribute to. So, like, what entices designers, or what do designers need as well before they will consider contributing to a project? And I won't spoil the things, but there is a list of
Well, I
things
think
that they
ideally,
want.
that's a great question, and yes, there is part of that. There's some answers in the study, but I think listening to what you're saying, it feels to me that there is this reactive nature, or the again not abusing the power differential, but like when a designer is waiting for feedback, there is a kind of a maintainer bottleneck. Like if there were
Mm.
designers as maintainers, probably there will be more information upfront, some process to deal with that, and less of a "do you like it?" Perhaps because it might be a great design, and perhaps the feedback from the developer is doesn't matter that much. It shouldn't matter that much, right? So ideally, at some point, I would like designers to say one of the things I look for to contribute to a particular project, that there is a design process. There are designers maintaining this. Even it was
Mm.
this project was co-founded by someone with expertise in design instead of an afterthought, and I'm kind of filling the gaps here, because
Mm.
that is a nice competition. I like, okay, if we want really to attract designers and level up the game for us, perhaps we should take that ab initio, like really this is something important. So who knows, perhaps in the future a similar research or a second part or a third part to your research could find hopeful answers when they say, well, now there are options. I'm looking for a design capacity and some design expertise within the team itself. Otherwise, I'm sorry, I'll pass, right? I don't know. I would say it's a tricky one, and probably an unfair one in many circumstances. But we need a shift in the trend of this: who's asking for what and who makes the final decision. Um, all right. Well, thank you very much. I now that the study is out and that you have shared the findings, I was there at FOSDEM when Eriol was commenting on this during the at the open source design track. I would like to also take the opportunity to ask, how do you feel about the reception, of the study? Any like what are people saying about what you published? Do people understand the findings? Do they agree with the findings? Who's saying what after they've known what you built through the study?
Do you want
Yeah,
me
go
to
ahead.
go?
You
Oh,
can do
okay.
it.
Is it positive? Is it like thumbs up? Like yes, we like it, or
Um, I think overwhelmingly the in it's been
okay?
interested, like, feedback. So people are engaged, like, for sure. Um, from like a this kind of research hasn't been done before and documented, and now there is a open, like, data set that is anonymized as best we
Yeah.
could, that other researchers could use, which is fantastic. Um, right through to people being interested, or organizations being interested in funding, like, the next phase of this, and what could be the next phase of research here. I think that there also, when I head out and talk about this study, there are more questions that people have, essentially.
Mm.
So the thing that happened at FOSDEM, Pablo, is people are like, yeah, but what about this
Yeah.
question? Yeah, but what about this aspect of it? And it's like, when me and Nimisha were discussing, like, what questions do we want to try and answer in this study, we had to be quite, like, ruthless ourselves, right, with the questions that we felt like we wanted to get answers to. So
Okay.
that's, I think, the overwhelming thing is people want to know more. They want to know more. They want more designers to be involved because we did the study with
Yeah.
5
Yeah.
designers. More, essentially, which is great.
Well, I have to say, like, my feedback, I think it was clear. Like, I really enjoyed your work, the process, the insights, the structure of the paper. It's so great to read, going from point A to point B to point C and following a narrative. Of course, there are more findings in some areas and fewer findings in some others. And it's not that a long read, really. I think it's 45 pages, something like that. And it's everyone should basically. I'm inviting people to go to Superbloom page, take the PDF or the Markdown version, and just enjoy 1 hour reading. They're going to know more about all this and perhaps change some ideas, preconceived ideas, or start implementing new processes. Who knows? But I will say this, and I know I can commit to this. I have that privilege. That if there is a second part of our research or some related research work that you are planning, you can count on us, to support that definitely. So let's have separate discussion later time to discuss that, because we need more research like this. So, well, thank you very much, Nimisha. Eriol, it's been a privilege, a pleasure, to have you here on this open chat. This is about, the intersection between design code and open source. I think this was like perfect topic to discuss. We wish you the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great
Thank
having you.
you.